Thank you. Thank you. All right, everybody. All righty, and this is supposed to be fun. All right, you're not in church, so enjoy yourselves. We've got a bar, and it's wonderful for me to welcome back General Petraeus. He is a true fan and a loyal member of the Marines Memorial. But what I wanted to do before I introduce our moderator, Barry Graham, and the General, I just really want to recap what JJ had to say. These things just don't happen. General Petraeus shows up, I show up, lights are on, it's being filmed. But behind the scenes, the people, and you all know Michael Allen, but we've got Judy, Julie, the bartenders, June, Vooch, Ramiro, Brandon, JJ, of course. There's a whole staff here that makes sure that when we get here, it runs seamlessly. So I really do appreciate it. A round of applause for everybody to put this together. And of course, you all know Michael Allen, the true brains behind this operation. But what JD was, so with the Marines Memorial, can I just show hands real quick? And I know you didn't come here to hear me speak, but who's first time here? Anybody first time? So we just got a few first timers, but we are a 501c3 19. We serve, Marines Memorial has been around since 1946, but we serve all veterans organizations. We have many soldiers, sailors, as we do Marine members. And 2024, now we're kicking it off with a fantastic speaker in General Petraeus, but we're going to kick off, we have our lower level fitness center is back open. So the pool has got water in it. It's not quite heated yet, so don't anybody jump in it. But we have some equipment down there. So if anybody's interested in donating and want maybe a workstation in their name or just put their name up on the wall, you can certainly go down there on the way out, but take a look at it. But it's back, and it's going to be as nice as it was prior to the pandemic. We also have a vision, and we're going to start this in this year, that we have 12 floors here. We're going to have a Marines floor, we're going to have an Army floor, a Navy floor, we're going to have a floor dedicated to the Korean War, Vietnam, and of course OIF and OEF. So when you step off and you step onto the Marine floor, can anybody guess when you get off the elevator what you're going to step onto? Yellow footprints. Yellow footprints. And again, what we're trying to do, and of course the theme, the Army floor is going to have a theme, and of course we're going to picture first, front and center, somebody in the name of Petraeus up on the Army floor. But the fact of it is we're trying to appeal to all of it because we are a veterans nonprofit, to all veteran services. So please, if anybody's interested in that, pursuing that or any kind of donations for that or for relatives passed away in the past, Ramiro is the head of our development department, and we'd love to discuss and talk with you about that. But with that, so let me really introduce. So we have our moderator, Barry Graham, absolutely fantastic. He has been part of this club for many, many years, and he is going to moderate. Not that the General needs much moderation, but General Petraeus is absolutely, I reviewed his bio again, just wanted to refresh myself on his bio. And I'm not going to bore you with all the details, but he has commanded at every level throughout the Army. Central Command. He ran ISAF, the troops in Afghanistan. Went to direct the CIA, retired in 2011. And as I looked at his bio and I thought about it, here we are in 2024. General, we need someone of your quality back in a leadership position in this country. Round of applause. A proven leader on the battlefield and a proven leader at the highest levels of this government. So with great honor, let me bring on stage Mr. Barry Graham and General Petraeus.
Thank you. Mike, thanks. Let me just start off actually by thanking you and your team as well. Yeah, these things don't happen by themselves. You and I just don't show up and it's all going to unfold seamlessly. But I just want to salute not only your many decades of service, of course, serving to 3 stars in the Great Marine Corps with a lot of great tours in there, some of them together, but what you've done here in the 2 years. You know, it's got to be interesting to go from being a 3-star and you got, you know, tens of thousands of people working for you, and all of a sudden you're sort of working for the customers of the Marine Memorial Club, and you've done it brilliantly. I actually said, I asked a couple of people, I said, hey, you know, how's this transition? You know, from being the, you know, the king of all he surveys to being, hey, welcome back to the club. You know, we're working on the club experience and all this stuff, but you know, life is about the experience. And he's done a great deal to already in 2 years to improve that experience. I went down to the new gym this afternoon, and tremendous potential there. Can't wait to come back when the pool's warm enough to swim in. But no, look, it is great to be back at this club. This is an iconic place. It's an institution here in a great city, and it's a real privilege to do this book event and to do it with Barry, who he's got to be the youngest looking Vietnam veteran in the entire room, who then went on to a tremendous career as a CEO and a chairman of various banks and investment banking and all. Actually, he knows very well that, of course, as I have learned, the highest calling in life after government service is the private equity industry. But it's great to be on stage with you, Barry.
God's gift to mankind, right? Yeah. First of all, General, thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate you taking your time. And General Rocco, you mentioned when he hopped up, he said this should be fun. So let me cross off my questions about the Middle East that I had down there. Before we get into that, General, why don't you give us some background how the book evolved and you got involved with Andrew Roberts to write the book, which hope all of you have. Conflict, the Evolution of Warfare from 1945 to Ukraine.
And we'll sign all the rest of them after this, so don't worry, we'll stay as long as it takes. I've known Andrew Roberts for many, many years, actually, and have enormous respect for him. I believe he's one of the greatest biographers and historians of our time. He's written the best single-volume biography of Churchill, best on Napoleon. By the way, he has a very dim view of the movie. He's written some movie reviews. More than a few historical inaccuracies in that sweeping epic on screen. He's written Masters and Commanders. He wrote about the last king of America, George III. And we hooked up somewhere along the way many years ago and did events together. I do a lot at the New York Historical Society. You know, I've had an academic background as well, and I've had, I guess it's 6 different academic appointments over the year as well. Currently, I teach at Yale in the spring semester, of course, on great power competition. And I'd interviewed him on the Churchill book 5 times alone. He interviewed me on the George III book. By the way, the question for that night, we were raising money in London for the Army Benevolent Fund at the Army Museum. And I said, why don't you ask the question, could the British have won the Revolutionary War? The answer to that is, of course they could have, if they had had a competent civil military counterinsurgency campaign, which they didn't, thankfully. But you know, I did literary festivals with him, even though I hadn't written a book. And he called up after the Russians invaded Ukraine, and he said, you know, there really should be a book that provides the military historical context for this war. And he said, I think it should cover the wars from 1945 to and including Ukraine. Would you be willing to write it with me? And he said, you know, this will be my 20th book. I've never had a co-author before, but I'd like to, you know, combine his extraordinary skills, and then, you know, I have had some experience in this. And I said, sure, I would, because I'd been looking for an opportunity to write about the 2 wars that I was privileged to command at their height, Iraq and Afghanistan, and then also to revisit Vietnam, on which I'd written my PhD dissertation at Princeton. But that was at the 10-year mark, and this is several decades later. All the additional scholarship, the papers have been opened up, all these things that, you know, the classified documents have been declassified. And so we got together. There was a nice bidding war. HarperCollins won. We do a video conference with them after they've, and it was a lovely advance. By the way, all of my profits are going to veterans organizations. And then so, we'll do something on the Army Hall, as a matter of fact. If you put a plate up there, you know, everybody wants to have a plate. I'll challenge, anyway. So, Harper says, by the way, how are you guys going to do this? And I hadn't really thought this much about it. You know, I got a full-time job. I have many full-time jobs, actually. And he said, well, General Petraeus is going to write about the countries that he's invaded, plus Vietnam. And he said, I'll fill in the rest. And we had a great collaboration. We wrote back and forth. We probably literally sent hundreds of thousands of emails back and forth in a very collaborative. And what's wonderful is that we're still talking to each other. And we actually, you know, well, no, if somebody, you know, an awful lot of people, the co-authors, it doesn't go well and it doesn't end well necessarily. He's a quintessentially delightful, wonderful Brit. And he also got elevated to the House of Lords during this time. Now he's Lord Roberts of Belgravia, you know, that needy constituency full of white townhouses. And it actually is pretty needy right now, because the Russians who own the homes actually can't get back to them. This is part of Londongrad, as they say, because they're all sanctioned because of the invasion. But in any event, we had a delightful time on the book tour. What's really remarkable about him, though, is that he has this incredible capability to actually drink and still be coherent on stage. This is something I do not attempt. I tried it once or twice by mistake in uniform, where somebody handed me a beer before a speech, and I realized it's not going quite as well. I don't know how he does it. I think he wrote so much about Churchill that he is able to emulate the great man. But so we've had a lot of fun with it. In fact, we just did another event today virtually. I was in Los Angeles this morning and the last couple of days.
We both talk in the book the importance of learning lessons from the past.
Yep.
And in order to get the big issues, the big strategic issues correct.
Yes.
Can you talk about how that's worked and how it hasn't worked,
Sure.
and why we
You
don't
bet.
learn lessons
Yep.
from the past?
Well, what we do is we lay out explicitly in the introduction. So the biggest takeaway that I hope, and I think he came to hope readers would emerge from the book with, is the recognition of the critical importance of strategic leadership. The leadership, so it's the fundamental decisions the president makes, but that's pretty done. You know, this will not stand about Saddam invading Kuwait. Maggie Thatcher, they will not hold on to the Argentinians can't hold on to the Falklands, et cetera. But then it becomes the senior military commander who has to perform 4 tasks, so as any strategic leader does. And the first and far and away most important is to get the big ideas right, to craft the right strategy, to understand the context in a very rigorous manner. Your force, our forces, their forces, the physical terrain, the human terrain, the neighborhood, how the country is supposed to work, how it really works, all the different factions in the country, the tribes, the religious sects, the political parties, the different elements of business, all of this, so that you can craft the right strategy. Then communicate the big ideas effectively through the breadth and depth of the organization and to everybody else who has a stake in the outcome, including America's mothers and fathers, residents of the White House, number 10 Downing Street, the Iraqi White House, you name it. Oversee the implementation of the big ideas. That's the third task. This is what we normally think of as leadership, by the way. This is the energy provided by the leader, the example, the inspiration. It's attracting the best and brightest, keeping them as long as you can, developing them, taking care of them even after they leave, allowing those not measuring up to move on to something else. It's how the leader spends his or her time. This is crucial. We had a huge butcher block piece of paper that laid out what I did every single day in Iraq. Then what we did several times a week, twice a week as a 4-star. I would go out on patrol with a unit after the normal morning updates, the things that started, and you know, then you'd sit with the company commanders afterwards, nobody else in the room, because they know every soldier by face, by not just by number, every casualty they know, and the responsibility they have, I think, is almost unique. And I would put it on him, and I'd say, I want to know what you're dissatisfied with, and I want to know. We used to, you know, sustain and improve. What do we need to improve, and what do we need to keep the same, even if resources start to run dry? And then I would give them my email address, by the way, and I'd say, if you are ever really frustrated with your chain of command, I'm not encouraging you to circumvent it, but if it's not getting done, I need to know about it. And I would get 2, 3, 4 emails a week from company commanders, and then we'd try to resolve the issues, because these matter. So, and then also the metrics. Metrics are crucial. Obviously, the metric has to tell you whether the big ideas are working or not. So if you have a flawed big idea, such as a war of attrition in Vietnam, search and destroy, you have a flawed metric, which was the body count. We'll talk more about Vietnam, because I know we have a number of Vietnam veterans in here, and I want to say something about that. And then the fourth task, which is often overlooked, is to sit down formally and determine how you need to refine the big ideas as the context evolves, as you make progress or experience setbacks, learn lessons. A lesson's not learned until it's actually incorporated in the big ideas usually, and then communicated through a change in a campaign plan, a fragmentary order, changes in the base order, et cetera. So that's the process. And between the 3 and 4-star tours in Iraq, I actually distilled that for myself personally, that intellectual construct, and then used it explicitly during the command of Iraq, then U.S. Central Command, then Afghanistan, CIA, and so forth. Very, very applicable in the civilian world as well. You look at the great founders of great companies, and actually we have some in here. We actually have some young ones. Where's Tim Chia? Oh, he just attended the VIP and left. Oh, man. You have to tell him that he was going to get a super shout-out. He's brilliant.
He's coming back.
He's a West Point graduate. They're finding him in the men's room right now. Getting over here. But again, he's a founder of a company generating 30 million a year or something like that. Plus he has his own, he's really, really sharp. He's got strategic leadership right. But then you look at, the Jeff Bezoses of the world, the Jack Ma of Alibaba, and one of my favorites, Reed Hastings, Netflix. And let's look very quickly at Netflix. And I've sat down with Reed Hastings. I said, here's the intellectual construct that I used. Did you employ something like this? And he said, absolutely. And he slightly different names. But, they went through 4 incarnations during his time as CEO, and he's now executive chairman. The first was, of course, they're going to put movies in the hands of customers without brick and mortar. So they're going to undersell Blockbuster. And they do it so well, so that's the big idea. They communicate it, they oversee the implementation. They get down here, okay, a couple of years later, how we doing? Well, Blockbuster's going out of business, but other people are doing what we're doing. So what do we do now? By the way, test question, where is the only remaining Blockbuster in the continental United States?
Oregon.
Wait, where in Oregon?
Bend, Oregon.
Big Bend, Oregon. This is, put a beer on my, actually there's a glass of wine right there, you can take it. Just exercise initiative. In the absence of orders, figure out what they should have been and execute aggressively. There you go, hoorah. So, but Big Bend, Oregon, I love because they're just so famously contrarian. They refuse to allow their Blockbuster to die, and so and now all of our, those of our generation, what we can do is we can take our kids there and show them what we did on a Friday night. You go down the aisle and you pick out a VCR tape and you went home and you pop. Anyway, so that's the first incarnation. Second incarnation, he realizes the context has changed. So we can have a new big idea, which is they can download movies because the speeds are fast enough. Okay, that's the next one. Number 3, that's the real breakout moment. That's where they decide to create their own content. $100 million on House of Cards alone, all these other iconic series, massive growth, and really redefines the entire industry. And then the fourth one was when he said, you know what, we're gonna make major motion pictures, and we're gonna go out and buy, and he does. He buys not 1, but 2 major movie studios. And so really quite extraordinary. Now, when I did sit down with him, I did note that the movie that had Brad Pitt playing General Stan McChrystal, with whom I was privileged to spend about 5 years almost, literally in the different combat zones, I said it just didn't work. I mean, Brad Pitt did not get Stan McChrystal. He marches around like a little toy soldier, he salutes stiffly and has no sense of humor. It's just not Stan, and beyond that, I could not get over the fact that Brad Pitt didn't hold out to play me. So, anyways, but you get the idea in strategic leadership. It is crucial. And as we walk through the different conflicts, what basically determines success or failure is the quality of the strategic leadership. And we go through this. Let me give you 2 quick examples. One would be the French in Indochina, Indochine as they called it. And they were very frustrated that they couldn't get the Vietnamese, the communists, also nationalists, of course, to join them in battle. They were acting as guerrillas, fight, hit and run, and all the rest of this. So they decided, you know what we'll do is we'll make a big, big base. Let's put it way out into the boonies, sort of, at the edge of our air power, but don't worry about that. This place, Dien Bien Phu, looks like a good one. yeah, it's surrounded by hills, but they'll never be able to get artillery up in the hills. By the way, a particularly nice French touch, the main base, there were actually 5 outposts, and they were named for the women who were the mistresses of the commander, French. And so then, obviously, the Vietnamese did join them in battle. They did get howitzers up on the hills. They carried the ammunition. They took them apart in many cases, reassembled them, got ammo up, and absolutely hammered the French. And it basically laid siege to Dien Bien Phu. And eventually they had to surrender, went into captivity. There was a peace agreement reached in Geneva that then partitioned North and South Vietnam. A really bad big idea, Dien Bien Phu. So the Americans come in, mid-50s. We have the lessons of Korea ringing in our ears. Of course, that war started when the North attacked the South across what was sort of not a demilitarized zone, but a line of demarcation. And the Vietnamese say, you know, Americans, we have a problem of security in the villages and hamlets, and we'd really like your help with figuring out how we can improve the security for the people. We think that should be the focus. We said, no, you know, look, we know what you need, and it's you need 9 divisions, the size of our divisions, because you have to worry about an invasion across the demilitarized zone from north to the south. And that was not the right big idea. And we never really focused on what was most important, which was the security of the people, until, frankly, the Marines created the Combined Action Platoon program somewhere in the mid to late 60s. And then ultimately, the entire command, by the way, the overall commander did not like that program, thought they should join up and do what the Army units were doing, which was thrashing around in the jungle with quite ephemeral effects. And it was wonderful to go back and revisit some of the literature that I'd read along the way, but with a different perspective. For example, I read We Were Soldiers Once and Young again, but when I first read it, I was a battalion commander. And of course, this is written by somebody who was the battalion commander of an air assault unit, 1st Cavalry Division. I was an air assault battalion commander at the huge battle of the Ia Drang Valley. And, you know, a great success, I guess. We prevailed, we owned the field. We killed 10 of them for every one of us or so. And when I read it the first time, I read it for the small unit leadership, the heroism, how did he motivate these people, how did he operate? This time I looked at his reflections on it, which I'd sort of missed the first time I read it. And he said, so it's in the later part of the book where he's thinking back on our experience in Vietnam, and he said, you know, General Westmoreland thought it was great that we killed 10 of them for every one of us. They took dozens of US losses, though. It was a very substantial setback. He said, I am not sure the American public, America's mothers and fathers, agreed with that. And then he also thought, you know, the Vietnamese, North Vietnamese, were replacing their losses every single year through mobilization, and we were embarked on a war of attrition, essentially, search and destroy, a lot of indiscriminate use of fire, unobserved artillery, B-52 strikes, all of this. You were talking about doing bomb damage assessment of this. When, in truth, we should have been focusing on security of the people, which we did not do until General Abrams took over in mid-1968 and never really was able to fully transform it, but he did integrate the civil and military elements. So he had Colby, the CIA, eventual CIA director, was running the Phoenix program, focused on the small units, essentially doing what our counterterrorism forces did in Iraq and Afghanistan, joined up with the embassy, focused a lot more on the individual, again, villages, hamlets, regions, and provinces and so forth, but still had the overhang and sort of the muscle memory of what we'd been doing and focus on body count rather than on what we were securing. And again, General Lew Walt, on the other hand, got it exactly right, but was not appreciated, frankly. In fact, he actually retired as a 3-star, not a 4-star. In fact, partly, I think, because the overall commander did not appreciate that they actually had it right and he had it wrong. That is a case of flawed strategic leadership. And I actually want to ask, if I could, that those who served in Vietnam stand for a moment so that we can give you the thanks that our country did not give you when you came home from that war? Please stand up. Barry, you too. And let me note as well, if I could really quickly, that there's no group in America that did more to ensure that those we were privileged to command in Iraq and Afghanistan got the welcome home when they came back from the wars that the Vietnam generation never got.
And some of the junior officers here might tell you not to get distracted by this, but when you look at a metric like body counts, which became the primary metric at the junior officer level, some of those body count metrics might not have been accurate.
Well, that's the other problem. It became a lack of integrity. That eroded integrity in all that was being done.
Yeah.
And the effort to try to have metrics for everything. And by the way, it's all going back to the Pentagon. So the Pentagon, McNamara bears some responsibility for this as well, needless to say. But in any event, that I think illustrates how important that first task of strategic leadership is. The truth is that when it came to Afghanistan, after a brilliant initial campaign, it took us 9 years to actually get the inputs all right. That's not just the big ideas, the strategy that took about 7.5. General McChrystal, in fact, finally got the strategy largely right. But then to get the forces required to establish the organizational architecture and all the elements that you need to carry out a comprehensive, integrated civil military counterinsurgency campaign together with our Afghan partners and obviously a very large coalition, and to have the right preparation of our forces, to get the right leaders in place, to get almost the right level of diplomats, spies, development workers, and so forth. And in fact, coincidentally, I ended up being the commander at that time, and we did accomplish the missions laid out for us that year. Unfortunately, in the same speech in which the president announced the buildup, he also announced that we will be drawing down in the summer of 2011. And I thought that was unnecessary and frankly ill-advised. If you're in a contest of wills with an enemy, don't tell them that you're going to start drawing down. In contrast, the president for whom I commanded the surge said, hey, you don't tell Congress, you don't need to tell Congress anything. And I didn't. I refused to tell him. I said, we will do it when the conditions are met. Even knowing, candidly, I knew we had to draw down. The Army forces had already extended all of our units from 12 to 15 months. We could not do it again, and we had to draw down, but I refused to tell Congress we would. I don't want the enemy thinking that we're going to do that. So you can see, again, the comparison and the contrast. And the surge, the surge that mattered most was the surge of ideas. It was the change of big ideas, 180 degrees. It doesn't, people talk about change management. Can't do anything more than 180-degree difference. But by that time, our forces knew what we needed to do. We then had the doctrinal manual. We prepared them far better. We learned from the early years there. And again, then we're able to carry it out and drive violence down by some 90%.
So General, if you take the historical perspective you lay out in the book and the logic that's there, and we turn to some of the current conflicts going on now, and start maybe with the Middle East, which your book starts with, and you spend a lot of time talking about from 1948 in the Middle East, and perceptively named the death of the dream of peace.
Yeah,
is how you refer to the Middle East.
Yeah.
So we look at Gaza today with the massive destruction, the civilian casualties, the challenge that the IDF faces, these tunnels we're reading about. What's your assessment of the ground war today?
Sure.
And if Bibi called you tonight and said, General Petraeus, what should I do? What would be your advice? Sure.
First of all, I should note that I actually talked to individuals there. I have not talked to him since this started, although I've certainly met with him a number of times in the past. Let me start by actually just laying out the context, because again, that's always hugely important. And to appreciate really what the Israelis have gone through, recall that we lost not quite 3,000 in the 9/11 attacks. They lost the equivalent in our per capita, if you will, of 42,000, which is what the number they lost would equate to, 1,200. And they had an equivalent that we would have had of about 7,000 hostages taken. It was 240, which would equate to that in our population. And of course, many of these deaths were carried out in unspeakable, really horrific, barbaric fashion, and filmed and even uploaded as if they were proud of this. So you have to keep that in mind. You have to remember that Hamas's goal in life is the destruction of Israel and of Jews. And I think it is understandable, therefore, that Prime Minister Netanyahu and his team would lay out the current three big ideas are to destroy, or the objectives are to destroy Hamas. I think that is necessary. Dismantle the political wing. Hamas can never again administer Gaza, or it will come back to what it was. And to obviously get their hostages back. Destruction, as all the military and ex-military members in here, veterans will recall, means doctrinally to render the enemy incapable of accomplishing his mission without reconstitution. Keep your eye on without reconstitution. We learned the hard way with the Islamic State after we withdrew our combat forces from Iraq, and the Iraqis took their eye off the Islamic State, which had been destroyed during the surge, that an organization can reconstitute. And of course, it eventually established the first ever caliphate. And we had to go back in and help the Iraqis and Syrian Democratic Forces eliminate it. So those are the three big ideas. Now, the context in which the Israeli Defense Forces, as you mentioned, I can't think of anything more fiendishly difficult. In fact, Andrew Roberts, my co-author, and I went back and mentally reviewed all the conflicts we covered. There's nothing in an urban operation that is remotely as tough as this was. And that includes, Ramadi was really hard, Fallujah was really hard, Baquba, Mosul, city of nearly 2 million people. These were very, very tough. But Hamas in Gaza is even tougher. This is an enemy who doesn't wear a uniform, who knows the neighborhood intimately, even better than did the Islamic State in many of the cases where we fought them. At that time, Al-Qaeda in Iraq. They use civilians as human shields. You have quite high-rise buildings, much larger than those that we generally had to clear. And of course, you have this subterranean complex of hundreds and hundreds of miles of very advanced tunnel work and command posts underneath the ground, manufacturing sites, infrastructure, storage, communications, all the rest of that. And again, a large population, 2.3 million people. So again, the most fiendishly difficult. And I think over time, I fear that there will be more of what we had to contend with, which was the most pernicious threat, and that is individuals willing to blow themselves up to take you with them. That is a particularly challenging endeavor for men and women on the ground. I also think that there need to be additional big ideas. And they're conscious of this. I have talked to some quite senior individuals and also a couple of former prime ministers, a couple of former chiefs of staff. They know they have to figure out who's going to administer this. You know, we learned this the hard way. We did the fight to Baghdad. I was a two-star then. Great. You know, it goes a lot faster than anybody thought. I've been told down in Kuwait. You know, I asked a question down in Kuwait before we launched the invasion. I was commanding the 101st Airborne Division. In the final powwow, they called us back in from the desert floor. And anybody got any questions? And a few questions. And then I asked, you know, excuse me, can you give us a little more detail on what happens when we get to Baghdad and take down the regime? And there was a retired three-star in charge of this effort. And he said, Dave, you just get us to Baghdad. We'll take it from there. That did not prove to be particularly effective, unfortunately. In fact, we took the first big city, the city of Najaf. It's about 300,000, 400,000 people, and the holiest city in Shia Islam. Tough battle for about 3 days, all three brigades, all the attack helicopters, everything else. And all of a sudden, the enemy just collapses. And I remember calling my boss, and I said, hey, Victory 6, this is Eagle 6, I've got good news and bad news. The good news is we own Najaf. What's the bad news, he asked. We own Najaf. What do you want us to do with it? And he said, call that guy that, you know, said, get us to Baghdad. So actually, we called him up. Nobody answered first. then we finally figured out how to get hold of them. They answered, and I said, hey, why don't we try it out here? We can see how it goes here before we try it in a city of nearly 7 million people. This is about, again, 300,000, 400,000. He said, well, we're a little busy down here getting organized. You're on your own, Jack. So we had to leave an entire brigade combat team there just to administer this, because the assumption was, we're going to topple the regime, and everybody else will stay in place, and they're all going to surrender to us, but then continue to do their job. And obviously that was a flawed assumption. In fact, that was when I turned to my embedded reporter and said those fateful words that I heard again and again and again, tell me how this ends. And God, did Congress ever hit me with that every time I testified in the subsequent years. So again, they're working on that with respect to Israel. The problem is that we are telling them, don't reoccupy. I think we mean well. I think that may be incorrect because I don't think there's an alternative. Israel doesn't want to reoccupy. They left in 2005 for a reason. But I don't think there's nobody in the region raising their hand.
Yeah.
I was just in Abu Dhabi and Dubai, and there was a big gathering of current and former defense and foreign ministers and so forth, and they're not going to go in and help out in this case. And obviously there's no trustworthy, capable, competent Palestinian headquarters on prepare to deploy orders in the West Bank that you can, okay, send them in. So I think they're going to end up being in charge. And by the way, I think they have to be, not only just because there's nobody else available, but because if they don't, they can't keep Hamas from reconstituting. So that's a huge challenge. Beyond that, I also think they need to be asking the question that we always had on the wall of the command posts when I was privileged to command, that asked a question, will this operation take more bad guys off the street than it creates by its conduct? And if the answer to that is no, and a lot of heads are nodding in here because that's how we approach these operations, particularly challenging in urban settings. But if the answer to that is no, you're supposed to go back and recraft the operations so you get to yes. And if you can't get to yes, then you're supposed to sit under a tree until the thought passes. I am worried that some of these operations may have created more bad guys because of the very substantial munitions in urban areas. Now, clearly, I'm reluctant to grade this because I don't know the importance of the target. Again, as you know, in law of land warfare, it's proportionality on the one hand, but the necessity of military operation on the other. But I think that there has been a lot of examination of that issue. I mean, President Biden and Secretary Blinken have said there are too many innocent lives lost, and there's been a lot less of that recently. It's a different phase. The problem is that you still have to, I think, clear and hold every bit of Gaza. And the way we did in Fallujah, for example, the final time, we actually created gated communities. We used to say, hey, you pay a lot of money for a gated community in Miami. We're giving it to you for free. But it was really so we can control the security of the people. We give biometric ID cards right away. The Marines were extraordinary at this. And that's what they've got to do. But if you think about it, the Israelis don't have any of this in their muscle memory because they've not done a major urban operation in decades, if you count, say, the Beirut operation as one, and even that was slightly different. So this is really challenging. They need the additional big ideas, I think. And then the final one I think that they need to do is what we did again before we went into Ramadi and Fallujah and Bokoub, and we told the people, we're going to make your life better. That's why we're conducting this operation. Not just about killing bad guys. It's about making your life better by separating the bad guys from you. And here's what we're going to do. And we're going to keep the hospital open. We're not going to close it. We're going to make it look what right looks like. We're going to get additional humanitarian assistance in, and we're going to control its distribution, which means you have to really control these areas. And I'm not sure that the level of control is at that which would be required to carry out that kind of approach. But if you don't clear every building, every floor, every room, every cellar, every tunnel, entrance and then tunnel, you are not going to know whether you actually really have control of those areas. And again, this can take many, many, many months. We're over 3 months into this, and they've largely cleared most of northern Gaza, but a huge amount of work still to do in the central part, even more in the south. And the south is where we think the leader, Yahya Sinwar, is, and surrounded by hostages deep underground probably. So this is a tough mission. I think we should be supporting Israel in every way that we can, including occasionally some suggestions or cautions here and there. But I think the idea that people are pushing ceasefires if you haven't actually destroyed Hamas would be akin to pushing a ceasefire before you've destroyed the Islamic State, which is the analogy, I think, for this, noting that there's a Palestinian national element to this as well. So very, very tough stuff. And that's before we talk about Israel and Hezbollah up in southern Lebanon, before we talk about the challenges the Iranian-supported Shia militia are causing for our troops, where they're trying to push the Iraqi government to ask us to leave, having asked us to stay, of course, and then the challenges that you see in the Red Sea, where the Iranian-supported Shia Houthis are disrupting freedom of navigation for 15% of the world's
So
maritime
how would
traffic.
you prevent a wider scale regional war? You've got Houthis misbehaving, and Pakistan today launched some bombs from against Iran.
Yep. That's separate, I think. Pakistan and Iran is essentially their own. It has really nothing to do, I don't think, with Hamas and the other actions that are related to Hamas. Again, the reason Hezbollah is shooting a moderate number of munitions into Israel every day is to show some degree of sympathy for Hamas. But Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, does not seem at all inclined to get into a real slugfest with Israel, remembering what took place in 2006 in that war. And I was in the region not long after that, and then of course later was the commander of the whole region. And we did reassessments. You know, originally the assessment of the 2006 fight with Hezbollah was that the Israeli Air Force overpromised and underdelivered. Over time, we came to completely change that. They really hammered Hezbollah. They're still rebuilding now, and I don't think Hezbollah wants to get into that kind of fight, although you have to be worried about it, especially because the Israelis want to push Hezbollah back north of the Litani River, which would take them out of certainly 107 millimeter, probably 122 millimeter range of Israel. Those are common munitions. But keep in mind that Hezbollah has roughly 150,000 missiles and rockets pointed at Israel, so they could do enormous damage. But there's perhaps a bit of mutual assured damage here at play. The Houthis, I think, are a bigger problem in some ways because they're really quite an industrial strength affair here. They've been armed by Iran for many, many years. They were engaged in a civil war with the Saudi-supported Sunni Arabs in Yemen. And of course, the Saudis are very wary. They crafted a ceasefire, which meant that the Houthis no longer shoot missiles and drones and rockets at them, and they were on the receiving end of a lot of these. So that's why they're not throwing in fully with us on this. They have reservations about it. And we have reservations about that. We don't want to see the Civil War start up. It was a humanitarian catastrophe. But we have to take out the radars, the command and control systems, the storage sites, the launch sites, probably at some point many more of the fast boats or any of the other systems that they're using that are creating such problems. Now the good news here, if there can be good news, is that it doesn't have a massive effect on the global economy. Essentially, the fuel that comes out of the Gulf, for example, which normally would go through the Suez to Europe, or Mediterranean, and so forth. Yes, it has to go around Africa, and it adds anywhere from 7 to 12 days to the trip, but it still gets there. Mm-hmm. It's not reducing supply to the global market for Brent crude or what have you. Disruption of maritime freedom of navigation from the Gulf would be much more serious. That would spike the crude oil and natural gas markets, and that's something I hope doesn't happen. We've seen Iran take discrete actions against ships there, which has to cause concern, again, especially having been the overall commander of this region.
So ironically, we've just been talking about the Middle East because it's top of people's mind and headlines, and yet for the past 2 years, the war in Ukraine was really top of mind. And could you reflect on that now as to, it appears some of the support in the U.S., or at least in the House, is questionable
Yes.
for
Yep.
Ukraine. At the same time, they're running low on weapons and ammunition. Russia's hanging in there despite their
Yep.
flawed strategy, to use your phrase. Can you tell us how this ends, and what do you think the current assessment is?
Sure.
We read different things about Ukraine's abilities.
Yep. So I taught economics in an earlier life, and I learned that you can never go wrong by answering the question starting with, it depends. and it does depend. It depends on the continuation of U.S. support. Look, I think this is as right versus wrong in the world as it gets. You know, you have a brutal, unprovoked invasion of a neighboring country at the orders of a grievance-filled kleptocratic leader's revanchist and revisionist view of history, Putin obviously, who denies Ukraine's right to exist. They're a democracy, however imperfect, a free market economy, again, however imperfect. And really, European security, I think security in general, hangs in the balance here. If a country can get away with invading his neighbor in this way, and by the way, keep in mind, Putin will not stop in Ukraine. He's got his eyes already on Moldova, on Lithuania. Lithuania is a NATO member, of course, so now you got real problems, and others. So I think it's, all of these things, we aren't doing what we do around the world for charity. This is in our cold, hard national security interest and in the interest of maintaining the prosperity of a world order that we largely constructed together with allies and partners who also prosper from it. And preserving that, I think, is very important. So it's really disappointing to see the challenges in the House of Representatives that are preventing them from coming together to agree with the Senate on a package of a large supplemental that would provide a substantial amount to Ukraine, but also a substantial amount to Israel, substantial amount for our southern border, and some assistance for Taiwan as well, probably also for the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which is running out of money. So again, I'm hopeful that that can come together, but it's taking a good bit longer. And in the briefing that was just done for the members of Congress by President Biden and his team, apparently, reportedly, they laid out the end dates by which certain munitions run out for Ukraine if we don't provide additional assistance. That's not good, obviously. The way it ends really also depends, though, on continued European assistance. I'd note the Europeans have been stepping up. They have committed double what we have in overall security, financial, economic, and humanitarian assistance. And they've actually provided a bit more in terms of pledges than we have pledged in security assistance, and we've pledged somewhere approaching $45 billion. That's a lot of money, but over a 2-year period, with defense budgets in that 2-year period that are $1.7 trillion, we can afford this. Not only that, it's not about can we afford it, we should be providing this, because as Henry Kissinger observed before he passed away, NATO security now doesn't begin at the NATO borders, it begins at the Ukraine and Russia border, and I agree with that. It depends also, though, on Ukraine's ability to continue to generate replacement personnel and additional combat power, their ability to exploit their own very considerable IT skills, engineering skills, manufacturing skills, innovation. Keep in mind that what they've done with maritime drones has been so effective that they've essentially forced the Black Sea Fleet first way off their shores, and then to withdraw from the Crimean port of Sevastopol, in which they've been for hundreds of years. And that opens up the Western Black Sea, which means that Ukrainian grain can actually get to the countries in North Africa, Egypt among them. They're desperate for that. They're about 30% of the global market for exports, not production. So that's very impressive. They're making very good use of drones as well. And Russia, for all of the very flawed initial big ideas, you know, that they could invade, take Kyiv in a few days, topple the government, replace Zelensky with a pro-Russian figure, that was a colossal bad decision. And of course, they lost the Battle of Kyiv, Battle of Kharkiv, several others, and so forth. But the lines have hardened, and to be fair, the Russians have demonstrated some learning, and their defense was incredibly formidable and prevented the Ukrainians from achieving what we had hoped that they would achieve this past summer. In fact, I was there in May when the hopes were high. I was back there in late September where the mood was a good bit more sober, needless to say. It also depends on Russia. They seem to have solved their force generation challenges, call up hundreds of thousands of new recruits. They provide huge bonuses to essentially rural areas. They're shielding those in Moscow and St. Petersburg. The elites are not bearing the brunt of this war. And they are able to replace the long-range munitions, missiles, and so forth, not necessarily the tanks. By the way, talk about return on investment. You know, I've learned how to do that, or learned what that means in the investment world. You know, we provided $44 billion. Europe's provided about the same. They're doing the fighting, taking the casualties. The Russians have lost over 60% of their tank fleet. That's a huge development for the security of NATO. So, but also let's compare very quickly the strategic leadership, because you have President Zelensky on the one hand. You know, what's his first big idea? I don't want to ride, I want ammunition. Remember, the UK apparently offered him a government in exile in London because everybody thought Kyiv's going to fall and they're going to get run out, so what do? I think we offered transportation to Western Ukraine, but he says, no, I'm staying. My family's going to stay. We're going to fight to the death for Kyiv. This is our war of independence. We're going to mobilize fully, and all males are going to stay in Ukraine. Those are pretty powerful big ideas. His communication skills are exceptional. Of course, he is an actor. He was a comedian who played the president so effectively that he won the presidency.
That could never happen here.
No, reality TV would never provide a president. And so, you know, he's extraordinary in his address to Congress. The first wartime leader, by the way, to address both houses of Congress since Churchill did it in World War II. In fact, he's been described as Churchill with an iPhone, and his communications every night to his people, all the rest of this, really quite extraordinary. And then, you know, overseeing the implementation, his example, think of it, he changes out of a suit, puts on a uniform, he's never come out of it. He goes to the front lines, he shares risk and hardship, he pins medals on his troops. All of that really, again, very impressive. And then they do the refinement and all the rest. It's not all sweetness and light. There's some tension, and more than a bit of tension in political terms underneath the surface. Some of that's starting to get a little bit more pronounced because of the challenges that they're facing, but really quite exemplary strategic leadership. And you contrast that with Putin, who, again, underestimated the Ukrainian forces. I think also underestimated the US-led response, which has really been quite substantial until recent times, albeit with our administration delaying certain critical decisions far longer than should have been the case, which undermined the capabilities they would have had this summer. But still, he completely misread that, probably because we pulled out of Afghanistan and the way it was conducted. And by the way, one of the lessons of the book is what happens in one part of the world actually reverberates in others. And if you're worried about ensuring the elements of deterrence in the Indo-Pacific, they are, of course, the potential adversary's assessment of your capabilities on the one hand and your willingness to use them on the other. That undermines that. Remember when we left Afghanistan, President Xi said, see, hey, you can't count on the Americans. And look how it went. They're a great power in decline. Now, I don't believe in either of those, but I think that did send the wrong message. I also think it was the wrong decision. I felt that we could easily maintain 3,500 troops. You know, Vietnam was not sustainable. There was a certain point in time it was just domestically no longer possible to continue. And the casualties were very substantial, the cost very substantial, et cetera. But Afghanistan, however imperfect and flawed and frustrating, I believe was far, far better than what was likely to happen. I said at the time publicly I feared we would regret this decision, and I hope that we have, because it's truly a disastrous outcome. But we only had 3,500 troops on the ground. The cost was $25 billion out of an $850 billion defense budget. We had not lost a soldier in 18 months, and not because of the flawed agreement that the previous administration did, but because we were no longer on the front lines. We were doing what's called advise, assist, and enable, which is the way we always should try to do it if we can. Again, that's another issue. But Putin has gradually, again, figured out, and this war's not over. for all of his mistakes, all of his flaws, you know, sitting at the end of a marble table, you know, the minions are down there somewhere, they have to have a microphone to be heard, and not, you know, out in the front, not wearing a uniform, all the rest of this stuff. But they have, the objective reality is that they have a population that is more than 3 times the size of Ukraine's, and an economy that's probably 10 times the size, despite the financial, economic, and personal sanctions and export controls. So this is tough, and it really does depend on what we provide and others provide, and the sooner we can do that, I believe, the better. And again, it's not for charity, it's in our cold, hard national security interest.
So, General, as you pointed out, we've committed a lot of resources, rightfully so, and financially to that area, and that's an ongoing commitment. At the same time, our greatest threat is China,
right,
which is not in that focus that we're talking about, top of the news, and yet they've developed a significant military, economic powerhouse. They're misbehaving in the Pacific out there. Could you comment on their capabilities, but also, given the commitments we've got there, one thing the Marine Corps worries about is how would we manage as a U.S. military to, you know, do anything in the Pacific also?
Yep. First of all, again, it's always instructive, I think, to correct those who say, hey, we're engaged in 2 wars. We're not engaged in 2 wars. We're supporting people who are engaged in 2 wars. They're doing the fighting and the dying and the so forth. It's their war of independence and survival. And so it's not as if we are the ones on the ground. And it's actually, I mean, there's a relatively small subset of capabilities that we're providing to Ukraine or to Israel, for that matter, that we would really need in the Indo-Pacific. It's just a very different theater. Ukraine is a ground war at heart. Yes, there's some air, but it's not really, there's no close air support from either side because of the air defenses. Yeah, there's a lot of drones and missiles and so forth, and certainly some of the air defenses are useful. But by and large, the contrast with the Indo-PACOM area, and I don't need to tell this to Marines, I mean, this is night and day. This is vast distances, islands, water, et cetera. And again, there are relatively few items that we're giving to them that we desperately need. You know, we're not going to shoot, I don't think, too many 155 millimeter howitzer rounds in some kind of Indo-Pacific context. There are some capabilities, and actually the use of 2 carrier task forces to support deterrence and also fight the Houthis and so forth. Now that is something that's more significant. I think we have the capability to do it, though. And you know, if you think about the United States, we're sort of the guy in the circus tent that has to keep all the plates spinning simultaneously. We have allies and partners that help us do that, different plates in different cases. I think we're able to do that, and I think we should do it. I think American leadership really does matter in the world. I think we are the indispensable nation, again, for all of the challenges that we face. And if we don't do it, some of those plates are going to fall, and that will not be good for the world, not just for security, but again, for our prosperity, for the world economy. The China plate is bigger and more important than all the others in there. We have a lot of allies and partners to help us with that. It does have to be our overriding priority, even as we are engaged in supporting these other 2 endeavors. I think we can do that. There's still a North Korea plate, too, we have to keep an eye on. Obviously, the Russia plate. Iran is probably 3 plates, support to these very dangerous Shia militia in different countries, their missile program that has become much more significant, and drones, and then their nuclear program, which we still have to keep an eye on. That is quite alarming as well. That's only a few turns of the enrichment process from weapons-grade uranium. We're the closest that has ever been. There's still Islamist extremists out there we have to keep an eye on. There are various cyber threats, state, non-state, extremist, criminals, you name it. There are weather events that are actually so significant and more frequent and more severe because of global warming that are requiring, again, massive efforts in their wake. So you put all of this together, and it's a very, very daunting set of challenges and issues. I'd probably add in domestic populism in some of the democracies of the world. But think about that for younger commissioned warrant and non-commissioned officers, because you know the world we were in really, certainly for the last 10 years of our careers, we've really focused on two irregular wars. Yes, we started to shift focus and shift priorities and so forth to the big war again, but you can't completely take your eye off irregular warfare, as we did after Vietnam when we tried to consign the whole experience to the ash heap of history and forgot all that we had learned there at considerable cost. But today's leaders have got to be very familiar still with the whole spectrum of conflict in a way that we really never were. I mean, we focused on the Cold War exclusively for a period, then irregular warfare, and now it's all of that. And thankfully, I think that the leaders today are generally trying to preserve those lessons, even as we are rightly focusing more on major conflict and also transforming our forces. We have a chapter in the end on the future of conflict, from a world that I think, simplistically you would describe as a small number of large platforms that are incredibly capable, heavily manned, exorbitantly expensive, and increasingly vulnerable, to a massive number of smaller platforms that are still quite capable, are unmanned, and that are increasingly not just going to be remotely piloted, they're actually going to be algorithmically piloted, where the human in the loop becomes the human on the loop, the human who designs, establishes the conditions the machine has to meet, then programs the software and the algorithms, and by the way, it'll be a learning system with AI enabling. This is a bit daunting or even scary, and it has some major ethical considerations to it as well. All of that is ongoing.
So,
and
General,
I think we can do that, but I'd sure like to see some of the squabbles and the dysfunction in Washington resolved, to put it mildly.
good luck with that one. So, General, you've met in your military career senior Chinese officials, and then during your current stint. What's your assessment of their view toward Taiwan and what may or may not happen with Taiwan?
Well, the view that matters is obviously that of President Xi, who could be president for much longer. Of course, he changed the precedent, was going all the way back to Deng Xiaoping, that you do two 5-year terms, you get 10 years basically. He is now in his third term, and we don't know how many more there might be. So that's the view that matters. And it appears that his final legacy achievement would be to reunify Taiwan with the mainland, having already resolved the issues of the Uyghurs, Tibetans, Hong Kong, Macau. There's been a host of these that have been resolved over the years. Now, yeah, you also got to keep the economy going, and there are a lot of worrisome signs there, as you well know. Very high youth unemployment, the real estate sector that's probably 30% of GDP in aggregate when you add in all the related sectors to that, really in a bit of a death spiral, a real collapse. And then a population that's actually going down, not just the workforce losing 5 to 6 million people out of it a year, but the population is actually nosed over because of the one-child policy, and et cetera, and there's very substantial debt that you really don't know how much at the subnational level and so forth. But they have dramatically improved their capabilities, as you noted. The president has told, and really it's, in this case, of course, he's the head of the party, is the real power. If you get head of the party, you're going to be the president and also the chairman of the military commission. And he's told the military to be ready to carry out operations in 2027, or by 2027. Been a lot of turbulence, though. You'll have noted that he fired his Minister of Defense, his Minister of Foreign Affairs, the head of the strategic forces, several of the other 4 stars, and so forth. So it's not all been smooth sailing. There's a lot of corruption still in the system and in procurement and in production. But again, getting much more formidable. The one area that is interesting is that they have no recent combat experience. In fact, you noted, when I was the director of the CIA, we had a lot of mill-to-mill contact at that point in time. Then it went away for a period, and we just reestablished it, which is heartening to a degree, because we need to get some guardrails on this relationship. Severe competition can't turn into confrontation. But they always wanted to come out and see me, frankly, and to probably to have a picture, you know, with the seal, the CIA seal and all that stuff is, you know, one of the great bucket list photos for people. So I said, sure, bring them out. I always loved entertaining them, and they'd bring them in, and I'd say now, of course, you know, I have a little modest amount of combat experience over the last 10 years. I was, you know, deployed for 7 of those, 5 combat commands, but I know all you do as well. Oh, you don't, do you?
Never.
Because they have not been in combat since 1979 against Vietnam, and that didn't actually turn out all that well. And I wanted them keenly aware of that and to doubt very much how they would actually do when you get in combat. Because you don't know until I'm sure you had many experiences. I remember as a division commander, you're always looking at the lieutenant colonels, the battalion commanders. And we had dozens of them because we had 2 entire aviation brigades, not just 1, plus all the infantry brigades and others. And I had my eye on this one guy, West Point graduate, star man, you know, sort of like me, I guess, you know, shaved head, like, you know, he could keep up with me running. He was very bright, and he was going to be the G3 of the division. That's what you're looking for. Who's that person? And, you know, immodestly, I was the G3 after being the battalion commander in that division, which was picked by General Keane, who you all know. And lo and behold, we get in combat, and there was an indecisiveness factor there that was really quite pronounced, to the degree that I said, wow, that's not the candidate. And then there was this other guy who had a southern accent, was sort of laconic. He had a little bit of a knee injury. He had been a ranger, though. And he was just incredible. He was cool as they come. I remember walking with him in certain battles, and just phenomenal. And he ended up, although I had to call his wife the night before he was supposed to come home and tell her, well, you know, he might be a little longer. He's going to become the division G3 instead of going to the War College this year. But we'll get him home one of these days with the rest of us. But anyway, so I mean, these are just fascinating topics that we look at. And you consider the Chinese, again, do they have what it takes? And the truth is, you don't know until they're actually in combat and you see, you know, the person you think is going to be great isn't always, and then those that you probably underestimate a little bit. I mean, I should note the guy had a bachelor's and a master's from Vanderbilt. Very, very sharp. He did 5 combat tours with me. Remember, one of those tasks of a strategic leader over here is find the best and brightest and never let them go.
Well, so the last question, and I have to ask this, and you just brought up military leadership, command, capabilities. I can tell you from my little experience as a captain in the Marine Corps, if I had left the base and I knew right away, I would have told my regimental commander
I know what's coming.
that I'm leaving. I would have put the XO in charge, told the first sergeant I was leaving and when I'd be back, and told them how to get a hold of me. So I have to ask you to comment on our Secretary of Defense and what happened there and what ought to happen, if anything.
Let me explain this. I mean, first of all, I should note that I think very, very highly of our Secretary of Defense. I was privileged to be his commander, or his assistant division commander, in one case, in 3 different assignments, 2 of which were in combat. One where he was the second operational level 3-star under me during the surge in Iraq. General Odierno was the first, so he was the second half and was really brilliant. And then later was the commander in all of Iraq, replacing General Odierno, who replaced me. And of course, after that, he was the commander of U.S. Central Command when I was over at the agency, and earlier we'd been together in the 82nd. I think very highly of him. He is an intensely private guy, very, very self-contained. He and his wife, again, really try to keep their personal lives to themselves. He has personally acknowledged that this was a lapse in judgment. The president has acknowledged the same. The challenge here is that unlike almost any other position in government, except for the president, he's in the nuclear chain of command. I mean, it's him, the SecDef, President, SecDef, Chairman, and then, of course, the commanders of the elements of the triad, the 3 different types of our nuclear capabilities. And so you know, they've got to know where you are at all times and have, not only that, have secure communication with you at all times, unless you actually designate your deputy, pass it off to your deputy. I should also know, I had prostate surgery as the commander of Central Command. I immediately told the chairman and the Secretary of Defense. I will acknowledge I did not tell the press, and they never found out, even though it was unsuccessful, because I have a whole bunch of plates and screws from a parachute accident, and they couldn't get it out, so I had to do surgery or radiation for 8.5 weeks. So all of a sudden the calendar completely changes. All I'm doing every Monday morning or Monday afternoon, fly to Walter Reed, get the last treatment after everybody else has left. And then I'd get the first treatment every day of the rest of the week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then Friday would fly back to Tampa and I'd be in the headquarters. And even my own, the secretary at Tampa didn't actually completely understand what was going on. The people around me did. They just thought I was visiting the troops a heck of a lot at Walter Reed. And again, you know, now during the period that I was under, you obviously have to put your deputy in charge. So look, this was a mistake. And it was a pretty serious mistake, given, again, the unique, I was not in the nuclear chain of command. I certainly had responsibility. We had ongoing operations, and there were these that could be, you know, at any given time, JSOC can call up and say, hey, we need the go-ahead right now. We have a fleeting target, so this is not trivial. But it was nothing like the magnitude of what you might end up in a very short notice nuclear scenario. So this is a big deal, but I think that this is the kind of individual that, you know, you get a mistake in life, and I hope that that's the case, and take them to the woodshed and, you know, and set in procedures so that that can't happen again. But he's a very, very good man, and he knows that this one's on him.
Well, good to hear that. So, General, we want to thank you again for coming.
No, I thank you. It's great to be
General
back with you.
Petraeus, so we hope you'll get a chance to buy the book. You're willing to sign some books over here afterward.
Yep.
There's some wine left over here. But again, General Petraeus, thank you very much for coming.
And thanks to all of you. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this presentation from Marines Memorial Association and Foundation. To learn more about the organization and our programs, please visit our website,